Hi, you guys, and welcome back to the podcast.
We are the Carwells.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Sarah, and we are, as you know, Airbnb interior designers and investors. All right, welcome back, everyone, to the podcast. Today we have two very special guests, Kassidy and Erin. They are known as Beard and Braid on Instagram. We are super excited to have you. Welcome, guys.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So they specialize in luxury short-term rentals, and they have a lot in common with us as they went through a short van life phase, as well as so many hosts do before we get figured out on what we want to pursue with the short-term rental thing. But as we always do in every single podcast to break the ice, we start with an Airbnb horror story. So I will let you guys take it over and tell our listeners your Airbnb horror story.
Yeah, and this was definitely the worst of any. Most stuff is not really that big of a deal. There's some inconveniences and things, but this was by far the worst. And it wasn't Airbnb. It was actually on Booking.com. And Booking.com is very confusing in the platform. It's hard to use. There's lots of buttons, lots of different places to go find things to set up the listing. And so I didn't realize when we set up the listing that we had put at one of our properties, Western Moon, that it said that we accept cash at the property rather than Booking.com taking the payment for us. So that was a huge oversight. I don't even know how it happened. I even went back in and looked, and there was no way to say for Booking.com to take credit card payment. So that was a weird thing. But what ended up happening is someone booked for like 4 days, and our housekeeper showed up at the end of the stay, and there was someone there that was obviously high or intoxicated. He had just woken up, I think, and it was already an hour past checkout, and he had a gun in his back pocket, and he was just kind of walking around. And so I told my housekeeper to leave, like, and we'll keep messaging and contacting and try to get a hold of him. And we were watching on the cameras, and they ended up backing a car into the back and were like just loading a bunch of stuff in. And so ultimately, they ended up taking everything but the furniture, basically. They took all of our linens, they took all of our supplies, all of our back stock. Uh, when the housekeeper finally got in, they found like a crack pipe, and the pool was black from uh, and this is our pool guy who's familiar with the area was like, oh yeah, they were washing their crack pipe out in the pool, and that's why it got black. And then they had poured Dawn dish soap into the pool, into the hot tub, and so the hot tub was literally foaming with Dawn dish soap liquid, and there was some like blood splatter in areas from whatever else was going on. I don't know. Was there anything else?
A couple holes in the walls. Like it just looked like they had had just a bender of 4 days.
Yeah.
And then to cap it all off, like just backing a car up as we're watching the camera, like seeing them back up, and we're thinking, oh great, they're just finally leaving. They're loading their bags up. This is great. And to realize that they were actually just loading all of our stuff into the car was just like such a terrible feeling.
Yeah. Yeah, and so we have a really great team, and they were able to get everything taken care of. We had our maintenance guy there, we had our pool guy there, our housekeeper. She brought her family with her to help get everything ready, and so we were only late on the check-in because we had the same day check-in, and we were only late by an hour. And so we had messaged guests, and we had provided her a little bit of a refund. And they were there for like 11 days with their family, and they ended up having an amazing time. So they had no idea what had just happened in the property. And then with Booking.com, basically they told us to pound sand. They said contact your insurance. And because I had made the mistake on the listing, like we didn't get any payout for it either. So they didn't pay anything. We didn't get any payout. We lost. So it was like a $3,000 loss. And we filed a police report. Nothing happens. Like they used a burner phone, fake ID, and Booking.com took no responsibility whatsoever. So we immediately pulled all of our listings from Booking and only used Airbnb and VRBO. So
Only making that mistake once.
yeah,
Oh my God.
Amen.
That is wild that that's even an option. to like that a website like that would even offer that people pay cash at the
Yeah, because it was like originally set up for hotels and stuff and like small boutique, but it's like if it's a vacation rental, there's no like this doesn't even make sense. And they, when I messaged them, they were like, "Oh, there's plenty of payment options available, and you selected the wrong one." I'm like, "Okay, all right, thanks, guys." Yeah,
oh my
Cool,
god.
cool.
yeah, and they
I
take 15% too. They take 15% for
What?
what? Yeah, so
Yeah, they're outrageous. I mean, you guys know my story, right? Like, I had the exact same thing happen, only they literally cleared house.
yeah.
Which, granted, it was a one bed, one bath apartment. So, like, mine cost me about $3,000 too. So we were out the same amount, but I mean, same exact experience. It's like, over my dead body, will you catch my properties on Booking.com
Oh yeah,
again?
never again, never again. So
No, that's so unfortunate. And just, I mean, it makes you wonder, like, why the soap, right? It's like one thing when you're like, okay, you're doing drugs and you're like, you're not in the right sense of mind, but it's like all the other things that you did either while you were on drugs or not on drugs that you're like, what was happening? Like,
well, yeah, they also there was an old security panel in one of the closets that wasn't hooked up to anything. They had opened that up and they just yanked all the wires out, right? So they were super paranoid about people watching it or whatever. And so like,
Uh,
I mean, you can't even begin to imagine what sort of state of mind they're in. So I and it's interesting. This is like, 5 years into our journey or whatever, and for a couple days it was really heavy, and then it was just like, well, we just got to move on. Like, I thought a lot about other business owners with brick and mortar where maybe their windows get smashed out, or and you just got to move on and keep going, and you can't dwell on it. So we've toughened up quite a bit over the past few years with stuff like that. So
yeah.
yeah,
Well, and this speaks to anybody who wants to complain about cleaning fees, don't, because the cleaners came in and they helped you guys so much. It bugs me so much when people complain about cleaning fees, but then they do something like that for you and you like it's worth people paying cleaning fees.
yeah,
Right.
and we paid them extra. Yeah, the whole cleaning fee. I don't know if we want to get into that or not, but yeah, yeah.
well, and I mean, you guys have really high quality properties. So it's like, it just goes to show that, I mean, you've been doing it for 5 years. You've had, 99% great experiences, but there is no real way to avoid the nightmare scenarios. Like, they are going to happen. And so, what I always tell hosts is, I'm like, if you are getting into this business and you are like a really high anxiety person and you're like, really emotional, because I get emotionally attached to my properties. Like, there's just no way that I can spend a month in here with my blood, sweat, and tears and family, like putting this thing together and not be emotionally attached to it. But you have to go into it with the mentality of like, it's not if these bad things happen, it's when. And so you just have to accept that, like, in a matter of time, something is going to go wrong. Like, your stuff is going to get ruined. Like, somebody's going to ruin your experience for a week. And as long as you're mentally prepared for that and you're like, okay, I knew this was coming, and like address it on the front end before it happens, then it makes it a little bit easier on the back end to just be like, this is my shit sandwich. Like, here, I have to eat this, and then we're just gonna move on and pretend like it didn't happen, and we're gonna learn from
Pretty much.
it.
Yeah, and that one was sad because we took all of our lessons learned and put them into that one. Like we made really great decisions. We managed the contractors probably better than we ever had. We replaced all the appliances ahead of time, which we hadn't done in some of the properties before. Like we took all our lessons learned and we did it all on that one. And it is one of our favorites. And it was just sort of, crushing a little bit, but you just got to keep moving on.
Yeah.
So,
It's always that one. It's always that one.
yeah.
I feel for you. I'm so sorry that happened. Oh my gosh. But I am encouraged to hear that you're continuing to move forward. I mean, that speaks volumes that, like, the good does outweigh the bad, even in situations like that.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, honestly, the smaller stuff sort of gets to me more now. We've had past couple months. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but it feels like there's been higher expectations and a lot more complaints, and just the smaller stuff you can communicate as much as you want. And so, uh, yeah, the past few months have been like the smaller things have been getting to me more. The bigger things are a little bit easier to handle, I think.
Mhm. I agree. Yeah. Yeah. The big ones aren't, you just kind of have to move on and you're just like, well, it happened and whatever, that's kind of a one-off situation. But the little things that kind of just pile up are probably the harder things to deal with on a daily basis.
Yeah, test that patience.
Yeah.
Well, we've got quite a few questions here for you as we kind of dig into your Airbnb journey, and I will let Emily kick them off because I am the talker out of the two of us.
Yeah. So, can you give everybody your background? You kind of told us about van life for the day that you that you started into it, but can you give them your background about how you got started in short-term rentals specifically and why you decided on short-term rentals?
Yeah, we actually started maybe about 5 years ago, just renting out the spare bedroom in our tiny little 2 bedroom, 2 bath condo. And we were living in the house at the time. We would host guests in our spare bedroom, and we just had like such an amazing experience hosting people from all over the world and getting to know people. We learned a ton just by like being able to understand how guests like to interact, managing guests' expectations. It was like a low risk boot camp for us. And we had such a great time and we were making this extra income. And eventually we're like, what can we do to like take this to the next level? And so we felt like we were taking a really big risk, and we're like, we're going to buy a whole house with the purpose of renting it out on Airbnb. And so we ended up purchasing a home in Cleveland, and that was our first like real big investment solely for the purpose of short-term rental. And it was great. It was really amazing. Like we invested in this area that we've never been to before. Um, I went out there, I flew out there by myself to go shopping for houses. Just found a realtor online and went around, saw like 20 houses, just cruising around in the snow in February in a city I'd never been. And found a really, really great home and put in an offer. And then, like, we went out there. I actually went out there by myself for 2 weeks to get started on the renovations. And then Kassidy came out there for the final week. We did everything in 3 weeks. And it was just like a complete whirlwind. And we were completely exhausted on the flight back home, but we were like, it's going to be amazing. And the bookings started coming in, and we're like, okay, this experiment worked, and we're ready to do it all over again, type of thing. So that was just the beginning.
Yeah, and we had so the leading up to basically buying the house in Cleveland, we were totally burned out. We were working at, corporate jobs. I was on a huge project that was taking all my time and my mental space, and like it was, the classic burnout. Like, and now, today there's a lot of people talking about it and doing it, and like quiet quitting and all that sort of stuff. And I was definitely not quiet quitting. I was working very, very hard. But we had decided to quit our jobs to go do van life, and the van life was really to say, like, let's get some space to just think about what we want to do for the rest of our lives. And so we spent 18 months saving as much money as we could so that we would have a little bit of a cushion. And on like day one of van life, it was like, all right, what do we want to do with the rest of our lives? And it was like, we want to invest in short-term rentals and do real estate. And so that was great. And then the cool thing about what happened with van life is that we had a ton of, well, this isn't cool, but we had a ton of mechanical troubles. We actually had to replace the motor in the van twice while we were, yeah, it was, yeah, yeah, yeah. When you're living off your bank account and you have to replace a motor twice, and uh, that was hard for me. That was really hard for me.
And when your vehicle is your home and your home is your vehicle.
Yeah,
Oh, you're preaching to the choir.
yeah, and so we broke down in Tucson, and we didn't even plan on going to Tucson, and we ended up falling in love with Tucson because we were there for like 2 weeks. I took one of the city bikes. I rode it like all the way up to the mountains, which was kind of hilarious. People were like honking at me and cheering me on because I was on this city bike, like going out in the mountains. But van life, even though we kind of failed on that, it did a couple things. We found Tucson. It gave us the space to think about what we want to do with the rest of our lives. And it ended up actually, because we broke down so much, my old coworkers were following along, and it led into some contract work after. And so we were able to then contract and invest in real estate. And that's been a really great model. So we're still sort of working and working and dedicated to those jobs and that part of it, and then funneling and moving the money into the real estate, which is if you're thinking about, oh, I just need to go full time in real estate, I would get a couple deals, do a couple things, keep working, keep the income coming in, and then funnel it into real estate. But yeah, basically the whole motivation of this was like we were spending so much time at work with our coworkers and not each other and not our families and not our nieces and nephews and so the motivation to doing short-term rental is really to be able to live and travel and be with our family and our friends when and where we want to be.
Yes.
The number one thing that resonated for me in that entire spiel is that van life gave you the space to figure out what you wanted to do. Because, when my husband and I took off in our Volkswagen, thankfully, knock on wood, our Volkswagen, I mean, they are like, it's an 84, right? They're notorious for breaking down. Like everyone that has a van, they're like, yeah, it's just part of it. Like
Yeah.
you gotta roll with the punches, and we have yet for that thing to leave us stranded. Like we have taken it all over the country. Everyone else that we know that has a van has just these horror stories, right? Just like Airbnb horror stories, the van horror stories, and we have yet to experience that. But the space that it created, like when we were on the road for 4 months last summer, it was when we were stepping away from our arbitrage and we wanted to see if it would run by itself and if we didn't have to be hands on and if we really wanted to scale. And we were just at a point too where we were like so absorbed with our careers that we didn't have, like, we weren't, Ethan and I weren't aligned, right? We were moving a lot and there was a lot that was happening,
Mhm.
but we weren't moving forward together. And so there is something magical about being confined in a small space with your significant other, a lot of times without service, very much all the time in like some level of an uncomfortable situation that
Mhm.
like really forces you to have those conversations and allows like that space for you to have clarity on how you want to move forward. So it's just interesting to hear that you guys went through that exact same thing because that was definitely a huge pivot in my Airbnb journey as well.
Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah, because you are uncomfortable a lot of the time, and you have to work together constantly uh, and manage stress levels when things are not going right. But then you're out in the middle of nowhere with no service, and you have the space to actually have conversations and think about things without just getting ready for the day, getting your workout in, getting your lunch. Like the time that it takes to work and live a 40 hour plus career takes so much away from you mentally and in your relationships. And yeah, van life really allowed us to explore the opposite of that more.
Yeah, it just felt like we were just going so hard in our careers that we didn't even have the mental capacity to like dream. And it's all part of the trap, where you're just working your career, you're in this routine, you're in this schedule, and you don't even have these ideas of like, what does a different type of life look like? How can I think of something else that's different than what I'm in? And being in the van definitely did that for us. We were able to dream a little bit and expand our minds a little bit into the possibilities of something different.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then even now with the short-term rentals, it allows us to be able to make different decisions, right? Even with contract work, I can have more leeway on what I decide I want to do. Rather than, I know a lot of people, if they're looking for a new job, they might just take what they're given or what's available. And I feel like we have more options available to us. And we can also think about, okay, what's the next step? Do we even want to do short-term rentals anymore? Do we want to move into something else? That, so it's the corporate 48 plus hour work weeks. To me, I call them we call them a trap, because they really are. It's the rat race. You're in a trap. It confines you into this. And there's lots of great things about working a job and working for corporations and things. It just ended up not being for us. And this is a much better setup for what we want our lives to look like.
Yeah. So you talked about your first property in Cleveland, Ohio. Will you update our listeners for how far you've come since then? Like how many properties you have, where they're located, what does your portfolio look like now?
Yeah, we have one in Cleveland, and we have four in Tucson, and then we have two in Washington State. And So I think that's 7 total. And then we will do our condo every now and then, but we don't do it as much anymore just because it's a lot of work. But yeah, we have 7 properties, and they were all bought, rehabbed, furnished in the last 3.5 years.
Wow.
Yeah, I would not recommend going as hard as we went.
It was a pretty crazy pace, but it was, after we did Cleveland, then the pandemic happened. Well, actually, we did Cleveland and then we bought our first one in Tucson. It went live, and then the pandemic happened. And we were basically just like, we don't have anything to do. Like, we don't have a social life. It's just the two of us in our little bubble. What do we do with this time to make it the most productive that it could possibly be? So that way, one, we don't go crazy, and two, just so that way, when we come out on the other side of this, however long it lasts, um, that we have something to kind of show for it. So it was like every 6 months we added another property, did another renovation.
Yeah, because we could work remotely, we were able to be at the properties. So we were working our contract jobs, and we would be at the properties, and then the contractors would be there also, which is another story. But and so we use the same formula of it's basically the Burr method, but with short-term rentals, and we would make certain decisions about what we wanted to do depending on the property, the location, the market, all that sort of thing. And with each one, we got a little bit better and better, and we had to invest a little bit more and more in the upfront costs for, what, like with the pools. Originally, we didn't have pool heaters on all of them, but we're just everyone gets a pool heater because that's like the number one thing that people want in the winter. And hot tubs at all of the ones in Tucson. And so, but yeah, basically we follow the same formula: buy, renovate, and then we don't do the refinances. We have done a couple of cash out refinances, but and that's how we were able to buy a couple more. Um, but yeah, it's been sort of a crazy few years and interest rates were so low. That was the other thing. It was like the interest rates were so low, our buying power was so high, the demand was high, and so we felt like even though we were exhausted, we had to just keep going, keep going. This is a window of opportunity that we can't miss out on. And so I know that we're like exhausted, and our families think we're crazy, and we haven't seen our friends in months and all that, but it was like we have to keep going. So
Yeah, I'm kind of
Yeah.
jumping ahead in questions, but outside of Tucson, because obviously you said you guys fell in love with that area, why did you choose the markets that you chose to invest in? Do you just love the areas, the places you like to vacation, or was there some strategy behind like profitability that you kind of looked at?
Yeah. So for Cleveland, as I mentioned, like we had never been there before, but Kassidy was working a contract. He had a contract at the time, and I didn't have a contract. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to make my job be looking at all these different markets. I'm going to run numbers on a bunch of different markets that we might be interested in, places we've never been before. And I was kind of all over the map. And then for each market, I would look at like the top 20 listings, and I was running numbers on all of those. And um, and the numbers showed really well for Cleveland. And looking at the existing short-term rentals in Cleveland, I was like, you know what? We've never done this before, but I just have a feeling that if we get into the Cleveland market, we're going to be the best. Like bottom line, we're going to put everything out there. We've learned so much with renting out our spare bedroom. We kind of know what to expect, and we're just going to go all out. And our goal is to be the best in Cleveland. And so that was how we got started there. And then for Tucson, it was a place that we knew that we wanted to vacation. We knew that it was a place that we wanted to share the beauty of the desert with other people, because being from the Pacific Northwest, we just had this mental idea of what the desert was. And then when we went to Tucson, it was like, oh my gosh, it's beautiful, it's alive, it's green, there's a monsoon season, there's just like the cactus are blooming. It is just an unbelievable, magical place, completely different than we expected. And so we were like, yeah, we want to be able to share that with people. It's so freaking rad. And then for the Washington properties, Orcas Island has a very special place in our heart. Kassidy has some family out there. And so we've been going out there since we've been dating. We got married out there. Um, gosh, it was like 10 years ago. We're like, what's the 10-year plan to be able to buy a place out on Orcas Island?
That was actually, that was one of our big motivators because it's sort of like the Hamptons of Seattle. Like, like and I would never really normally describe it that way, but it's Orcas Island is one of the most beautiful, special places in the whole world. And so that was a huge driver for us, was to be like, we need our house on Orcas. And so that was one of them. And we live we're in the Seattle area. And so then the other one in Washington State was on another island, very close by, different sort of vibe, but still incredible on the beach. And so for those ones, we knew the markets. We know that it's sort of strong out here. You have Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook, like things are still very strong out here, and so those are like safer plays. Price point was higher for sure, but it's also places that we want to have and where we want to be. And then in Tucson too, there's different markets within Tucson. There's different areas in Tucson. There's a million people in Tucson, and so we looked at where we wanted to be. There's basically central and then the mountains. Those are kind of the two groupings. And so figuring out how to get places near the university in central and then up in the mountains with the sort of desert vibe. But we use AirDNA. The funny thing though is with Tucson, the AirDNA numbers did not support, like, if we trusted the AirDNA numbers, we never would have bought any of the properties. And like we're like triple what it says on there. And so we had to have confidence in ourselves that we were bringing something to this market that people are looking for. So especially in Cleveland and Tucson, we looked at the competition and said, we are better than this. And we know that there's people that are traveling here that are probably looking and going, there's nothing good for me here, so I need to go to a hotel. And so we feel like we're pulling in that market. And things have changed over the years, and there's more and more people like you and us like doing this higher design sort of stuff. So we did run a lot of numbers, but we also just trusted in ourselves.
Yes.
We resonate with that in the Michigan market. Absolutely. Running AirDNA numbers in Michigan is next to impossible, if I'm being completely honest. It's so hard to comp, because I think there was one time it was like $7,000 a year, and I was like, I know I can do way better than that.
Like, yeah, I mean, it's like 10 nights a year.
Yeah. I was like, and then I'm like, oh, it, like, other people would maybe think it's really scary, but when you so intimately know a market, like we know Michigan so well because we lived here our whole lives. So I'm like, no, I know people vacation in these spots. I just know it, and they're just not like taking advantage of it.
Yeah.
Well, and it's been sort of a mind shift, especially in the beginning. Like, we've always been frugal travelers, and so like we set the max at like $100 a night, right, when we're looking for stuff. And we had to sort of change our mind frame that there's people out there that start at a certain rate. Like, they don't want to go below $250 a night. They want to look 250 and up, and they don't even consider anything else. And so that's sort of hard for people, even us, to get our minds around in the beginning. Was like, if you push the design, if you push the experience, there's people that's exactly what they want, and they will pay more for it.
Yeah. Well, and you make such a good point on, like, if we would have listened to AirDNA, we wouldn't have bought any of these properties. I mean, we're walking into a season, or we have been for this last year, where we want to double down on partnerships, right? We're like both scaling our properties and we're scaling our network within the short-term rental space. And that's been almost our biggest obstacle, is like, you've got all of these long-term renters or long-term landlords who are transitioning into short-term, and they don't understand the value add of having good design and that good experience because they haven't had to, right? It's just oranges and apples. And so people so heavily rely on that AirDNA data, but it's like, it's not like comping rents of a multifamily apartment complex, right? It's not like black and white in that way. It like is so heavily experience based and marketing based that, a property that may comp horribly, but all of a sudden you're looking at it and you're like, in my gut, I know that I can make this experience out of this world, but AirDNA tells me it's a bad investment. Like, so far, every time we've gone against AirDNA and done it anyway, it's just paid back tenfold. And so it's like trying to convince investors that process works, and you're like, you just gotta trust me. Like, they're like, no, not into it, in the way that we are, where we're like, look, we have proof of concept, we know it works, but it's just,
Yeah.
it's
Well, I mean, it's like the hotels. You know, if Amangiri, I don't know if you've seen Amangiri out in Utah, if they comped what a hotel in the middle of the Utah desert, they wouldn't have any comps, right? They have to trust what they're doing, and the people, you know, if you build it, they will come. That's sort of the
Yeah.
it's like an old school like saying, but it's very true. And you have to be responsible. Like, what does the market look like? Like,
Mhm.
we probably wouldn't go into a Joshua Tree right now because it's so competitive and it's crazy. And it's like I wouldn't want to invest that much in that market to do it. We sort of like the secondary markets. You know, Tucson's been really good to us. Cleveland's been really good to us. And being able to come in and break down the competition, like with design and experience, people will find it and they will go there, like for
Yeah.
sure.
And we're
So
not just throwing noodles at the wall by any means. Like you said, we're still doing
yeah,
our research about the market. It's not like we're just willy-nilly picking something. It's just when you're running comps specifically from these websites, it's a little harder to make the comparisons. But we are still doing research, I promise you guys.
oh no, yeah, no,
Yeah, I mean, you're collecting all these data
Yeah.
points, and it's just one of the data points
Yeah.
that is this whole
Yeah.
big soup of like how are we making this
Yeah. And as
decision?
people
Yes.
who are
So
into design, gut instinct is part of our data points.
It really is. But you bring up a good point too with like secondary markets. I think that I mean that's ours is even more so smaller than that, right? Ours is like very much tertiary markets or like something below that even. But yeah, there is something to be said about looking away from where the obvious choices are, right? Like the obvious choices for people when you first get exposed to short-term rentals are very much the Austins, the Nashvilles, the Joshua Trees of the world. And like you at this point, when you're walking into those markets, you are competing with private equity, you are competing with hedge funds, you are competing with people who have done boutique hotels before this, right? And now they've just got money to shovel into properties that they want to avoid paying taxes on, right? Like they're way less concerned about cash on cash. They're way less concerned about all of the numbers that make a big difference for small investors. And so those smaller markets, there still is so much magic and so much room for people like us to come in and be competitive. So I think it's brilliant. I'm right there with you on those.
well, yeah, and then even through the pandemic, like we've seen people are moving to more of these secondary markets too, right? And so there's going to be more tourism in those areas moving forward, I believe. So,
Yeah, 100%. And like you said, if you build it, they will come.
Mhm.
Hopefully.
yeah.
Okay, so we have a couple more questions for you. What made you get into the luxury space originally? Because I know that that's not like a instinctive thing to do as a new investor to like pour a bunch of money into a property. What made you decide on the front end like, hey, we're going to do it better than all of these people?
I'll let you take that.
No, yeah. Well, I mean, I think I've we've always sort of given everything we have to our jobs or whatever we're working on, right? I don't like doing anything half-ass. And we've also traveled a ton and we've been to places and we know what value you get out of certain things and you can look at the photos versus what the reality is. And so we sort of went in with a mission of we are going to meet and exceed our guest expectations every single time. And we also want to maximize our revenue. We want to get the most out of this that we possibly can. And as sort of a hedge against the other side, right, of not being able to make ends meet on the property. And the way that we felt that we could do that was through Erin's designs and both of our knowledge of how to use a space or how to live in a space or how to design a space so that it's comfortable and usable and it's a great experience. So we kind of took all of our experience in travel to all the places that we've ever been and picked all the things that we really enjoyed about those places and then staying at an Airbnb and just really thought about what families and people would really enjoy. Uh, and so it's not even really a luxury thing. It's like, what would we want? you know, and sometimes I wouldn't even call them luxury because they're not these $1.5 million mansions or you know whatever they are. They're just really great homes that we've put a bunch of effort into making them as nice as they possibly can be in great locations and great neighborhoods with really nice beds and linens. Like we don't want to skimp on the stuff that makes it comfortable for people. And whether that makes it luxury or not, like it's just really what we want to provide to guests is a great experience, comfortable sleeping, like all the amenities that you would really want, and then that people actually use. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, speaking to your point, like you said, like we're not buying $1.5 million properties either, but it's really creating an experience for your guests that does make it a luxury property. I think that's something that we try to push as well is if you're creating the best experience for your guests, that's what we consider luxury. You don't have to be buying these $1 million homes that are so fancy and all these things to make a luxury experience for your guest. It can just be a regular single family home that you're putting your effort into to make sure that they're having a good time while they're there.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do like to imagine ourselves in the spaces and how we would use them and what's a great like memory or moment or something like that, whether it's through design or just making sure the seating is super comfortable and you can fit everyone in the house around the dining room table, or um, having really nice loungers by the pool because everyone is going to be out by the pool making memories. Kids are jumping in and splashing and having a great time. And we try to put ourselves in those spaces, and I think that like as you guys have done, like living in the spaces for a little bit too, as you're putting them together, really helps you understand like, oh, this could be a really cool moment, even though it's just a window with like a little bit of a nook. This could be a beautiful little reading corner, and someone's gonna love this space. This is gonna make the space so much more special. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, and you don't need expansive square footage to make a really nice luxury Airbnb. Like we've really excelled at taking, 1,500 to 2,500 square foot homes and utilizing all the space really effectively and focusing on nice bathrooms, nice fixtures, right? Like, because you can't have a bad bathroom. That's one of my biggest pet peeves at hotels and anywhere I stay is like it's gotta be a nice bathroom. But like taking even smaller spaces and creating the moments, uh, or like with Desert Views, the giant 3-panel slider door. We had never done anything like that, but you had to walk through the front door and around the house to get to the pool. And I was like, this is crazy. And it took us, we didn't even decide on that until like 2 weeks, 3 weeks into like living in the space. And I was like, we got to do this. We have to cut this wall, cut this wall, and we got to put a big, big pool slider. And it's one of my proudest decisions that we've made. But it was really because we were in the space and it's like, what would I want and what's going to look great and what's actually functional. I love when form and function actually like come together to create a great design.
Yes.
And but then like we were there and our contractor had like a 24-inch saw just cutting the brick, like the whole side of the house was cut down and
I was a nervous wreck, and we were working at the time too. We had like a little foldable table, but we had our office set up in the garage of the house that was like 120 degrees in there, and it was like, okay, our contractor is going to start today. He comes out with the saw. He's just sawing a giant hole in the brick, and stuff is crumbling. There's dust everywhere, and I was just like, I am gonna have a panic attack today. This is
yeah.
beyond. This is
Uh,
this is so intense. I just thought the entire house was gonna fall down. It was
Yes.
so nerve
There's no
wracking.
going back
Yeah.
Yes.
after he pulls the saw out.
No.
Right?
But I also
Yeah.
think that, I mean, you guys are, one, just speaking into existence everything that we preach all day long. So we love to hear it. We love to hear that people are, aligned with exactly how our philosophy is when we walk into B&Bs. But you're right. I mean, we call it a user center approach where it's like we have worked with so many investors, designing for so many investors, and they're 9 times out of 10, their goal is profit, right? It's very profit focused, and that just doesn't translate into short-term rentals the way that it does in most other real estate investing. And so it is about making sure that, one, you're utilizing all the space to where it's functional for you or any other traveler, but two, just it's like paying attention to those high touch point areas where it's like the bathroom, the linens, the bed, the things that you're touching and using in the space, how you're walking through the space, the traffic patterns. All of those things have to be like very intimately thought through for it to be an Airbnb that's got longevity behind it, where you're not getting complaints and it becomes scalable, right? Because then all of a sudden you don't have all these like back end issues that you're experiencing as a co-host. And so I love all of it. I'm like, as you're saying it, I'm like, yes, more people need to think this way about Airbnbs because it makes all the difference for both the host and the guest. It's just a much more seamless, interaction than when people are like burning and turning them and in and out and not thinking those things all the way.
Yeah, and I think it'll give Airbnb a bad name, and I think it has in some respects when you're just turning and burning. It doesn't speak to the higher end stuff or like the stuff that we do with the guest experience. And all the stuff that you guys post, I'm like spot on. I don't think I've disagreed with anything that you guys have ever said because you did it. And
it's so refreshing. It's so refreshing to be like, they get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's alone.
Yeah. And longevity, you have to think long term. You can't look at the short term. So like if there's guest issues that come up, really the only way that you can resolve them is either by like sending someone out or, trying to take care of it, but then also providing a partial refund of some kind. And that is like, it hurts, but it's longevity. You got to put yourself in the guest shoes, how they're feeling, what they're doing, like how they're using the space, what they're not getting out of it that they thought they should be, and addressing that. And it's about the overall longevity. You're in hospitality, and you got to think like you're running a hotel, a boutique hotel, and what would you expect? And what are the things like if you look at a brand like Ace Hotel, we love Ace Hotels. They are high design, and there's a reason, and they have great locations and great neighborhoods, and it's a longevity play for them, even though the rooms are small at some Aces or Moxies or whatever. But yeah,
And it's
so
comfortable, right? Like you don't need all the square footage in the world for it to be comfortable. So, I mean, when you mentioned the bathrooms too, it's like when we walked into this house, I know you guys saw all the quirky things that are with this house, and we've got like they built a bathroom in a bedroom, and the bathroom walls don't go all the way to the ceiling, and I'm like,
Yeah.
well, that fan had to go somewhere, right? Yeah.
no, I'm like, what? Why didn't we just move
Yeah.
the van? That's not that big of a renovation.
Yeah, we had a similar one, and you got to pay your contractor to fill in 6 inches of wall, and it's like what a waste. But like, we spend the money up front now more than we ever did too. And it might hurt your cash on cash a little bit, but it helps so much in the long run to just replace all the appliances, like buy the furniture. Like we used to thrift the couches, and now we just buy a sleeper sofa. We use apartment 2B. It's a guarantee, it's like $4 grand. It's like, I can't believe I'm spending $4 grand on a freaking couch, but it's a sleeper. It's a sure thing. It's good quality. Like we spend the money up front now to make sure that like long term we're avoiding issues.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's interesting
Yeah.
that you use the example of that hotel as well, just because like I stayed at a Moxie in Scotland, and it's what you're getting every single time you go into these places, right? And so when you're an investor like you guys are, where you have properties spread out across the US, these people are going to be like, "Oh, they have a property there and I'm going there. I want to stay there because I know exactly what I'm getting." And that's kind of the standard that we are trying to set for ours, and you guys clearly have set for yours as well. Is we are competing against hotels to a certain extent, and everybody knows what you're getting when you're going into these really nice hotels, so we have to be able to compete with that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And as we were growing our portfolio, it was like we want to become a brand. We want to have this brand recognition where it's Beard and Braid, and this is kind of the standard that they've set for what their properties will look like. We know that they're going to have a comfortable bed. We know it's going to be a great neighborhood, that we're going to be able to just step out the door and enjoy something, whether it's nature, or like a really great meal. And yeah, that brand recognition, it's really important because I know it's something that we look for when we travel too.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's so refreshing to hear people like spending more on the front end and being less concerned about the cash on cash because we go in it with the same mentality. It's like, you want a budget and we'll give investors a budget all day long, but we'll also preface it with like if the house needs it, the house is getting it. Like if I own part
Yeah.
of this house, if I'm sharing equity in this house, if I'm sharing cash flow in this house and we get in it and we realize that there isn't a dishwasher or we realize that we don't have access to the pool and we need to cut a hole in the wall. Like I'm doing it. Like, we're moving forward on it. We are less concerned about cash on cash, and we are more concerned about quality of life afterward, because those things are all going to play a role into how easy or difficult it is to run these things on the back end. And so if it's 20,000 more up front or nightmares on the back end, you can take my 20,000. Like,
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And early on, I would have said the other way around, but not anymore. Yeah, not anymore.
yeah.
So,
Okay,
yeah.
well, we've got two final questions as we wrap up here. We want to know your most favorite and your least favorite part from each of you on running short-term rentals. So we'll start with most favorite first from both of you.
Most favorite, I would say, I really enjoy the design and putting it together. As hard as it is, but seeing the finished product, especially thinking about the guest experience, right? And like the families and the people that are going to enjoy it. Like that really is my favorite part, is knowing that we're putting something together that's going to be really great for people and seeing the finished product.
Yeah. I was gonna say something similar, like creating this guest experience for something that people are going to go there with their families. They're going to be making memories on vacation. They are going there with their bridal party and taking their getting ready for the wedding pictures. It's like just being a part of people's lives in a really cool way and being able to craft the design and the experience to make it even more memorable is one of my favorite things.
Both of those. Both of those are literally my two favorite things as well. I
Yep.
couldn't agree more. Okay, what are our least favorites? What's the worst part about running short-term rentals?
I would say, given everything, when you are putting yourself into this house and this experience and you're just making everything so thoughtful, and then you have someone that complains about something that's completely beyond your control, like if it's windy and there's some leaves in the pool and they freak out and it's like, oh my gosh, it was just the most terrible experience ever. And it's like, well, we did have a monsoon that just came through. And of course, they're just looking at it with the perspective of that day or that the few days that they'll be there. And I'm looking at it with the perspective of I just spent X amount of months preparing for this. Like on my weekends and days off, I'm like designing this space and crafting this experience, and someone's upset about leaves. Like sometimes that's a little bit heartbreaking and tough to deal with when it is completely out of our control.
Yeah, I would say the same, but all I don't know. I deal with the day-to-day operations, and we have people that help us. We manage everything internally. But I see everything constantly, and that's been a lot, whether it's positive or negative. So that the the disruption, I don't want to call them disruptions, but especially if a guest didn't read anything, that's sort of hard for me, And so now we're taking time out of our day to sort of bring them up to speed, or whatever it might be. So please read what we put in there. Yes, and sometimes the desert does have bugs. So yeah, and I don't want to harp on guests too much because we have really amazing guests too. And I guess another part that I sometimes can't stand is the lending process. Like it's you know I can't stand it sometimes. Like the questions over and over and over again. It's like I have everything lined up and you don't read it, and then everything's always down to the wire. So
Yeah.
the lending process is always frustrating, and it always makes me want to give up. But you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. I just closed on a house and I called Sarah and I was like, "Was this that difficult for you? Because this is the most frustrating process that I think I've ever been through in my entire life." And she was like, "Well, Ethan actually took care of it, but yeah, he wanted to murder somebody by the end of that." And I was like, "Fair enough." Oh well, we lost Sarah. Well,
oh, sorry.
that's all right. I will wrap things up with everybody. So thank you so much for coming on. This was a really great conversation. It's always so fun talking with like-minded people in this space. But for anybody who doesn't know who you guys are or where to find you, can you please plug all of the things?
Yeah, so I'm Kassidy,
I'm Erin.
and we're Beard and Braid on Instagram. We have a website, beardandbraid.com, where you can check out the properties. We don't do direct bookings, but you can look at the properties sort of in more detail. Also, we were just on Netflix's Buy My House.
Yeah.
Stop.
Yeah, I think it's, yeah, I don't know the episode number, but I think it's called Chill Out or something. So,
Chill. I think it's chill.
yeah, so
Yeah.
if you want to see us on Netflix, it's Buy My House,
Yeah.
one of the
The
episodes.
Cleveland House.
Oh
Yeah,
my
the Cleveland
gosh,
House.
Yep.
that's so cool. Well, if you have I'll try to find a link and link the episode for people because I will link all of your guys' stuff in the bio of this episode. But if we can find that, that's so cool. You're on Netflix. That's insane. Congrats.
Yeah.
Our families were pretty blown away.
Yeah.
Add that to the list of goals that we have now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys again for coming on. For anybody who is not following Sarah and I on socials, we are at the Carwells everywhere. And thank you guys for listening. We will catch you guys next time. Bye.
All
Yeah.
right.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.